Well, good morning. My name is Kemp, and I'm an American soldier. If you look on this slide, that patch represents the last unit I commanded in combat. Over my years, I have collected what I call a lot of leadership acorns. And so my intent today is to share some of those with you. You can take them and place them in your pocket and save them for a rainy day or discard them. Whatever works best for you. But the focus today, as you can see on the slide, is what I refer to as trust-based leadership. And what brought me or drove me towards this concept is many years ago, it seems like anyway, I spent some time at the Army War College going to school. And while there, I was introduced by a gentleman named Lieutenant General retired Walt Ulmer to a paper he wrote in the late 70s, directed by the Chief of Staff Army, and it was on the culture of the Army. Wrote the paper, him and two more students, they briefed to the Chief of Staff Army, and he said, "We're not going to publish that." A week later, in the same course, we read a paper that was published in the late 1990s. Well, when you look at these two products, one was done on old mimeograph paper, spun on a drum. Most of you have no idea what that is, but us old-timers do. And the other one was on slick, glossy paper. But it was like reading the very same products. If they had been printed the same, you'd have thought you were reading the same information 20 years later. And what it talked about was that junior soldiers didn't think seniors trusted them. Micromanagement, zero-defect mentality, risk aversion. And when I presented this to my seminar mates, the hackles went up on their neck. You could see the insult on their face because we trust our soldiers. Like I said, don't be mad at me. I didn't write the reports. I'm just presenting the data. But me too, I trusted my soldiers. But I began to think about this topic. Did I really convey or build a philosophy that helped ensure those soldiers knew that I trusted them to do their work? It's a great writer by the name of Frank Lencioni. He did a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team. And he talks about this pyramid. At the base of an organization, a foundation is trust, built through open, candid, frank dialogue. But in its simplest form, if you think about people that have been married long term, not out of convenience, but because they have made a decision to do that, you can give a whole list of reasons why your spouse is a wonderful person. But the reality is, if you get down to the very central core, it's trust. Look, gone 3 years out of 10 forward deployed. I never worried about whether the kids were taken care of, the dogs were fed, the house wasn't burned down, whether my wife would be home after 12 months. Because of that central core called trust. And if you've ever been in a relationship where that trust has been violated, then you know full well how that feels and how to get back across that line is a near impossibility. So when I think about philosophy, for years people say, "What's your philosophy? What's your leadership philosophy?" Every time you go to command position. And it was a struggle. And I thought it shouldn't be a struggle. And it's not anymore, because what I'm going to share with you today is about a half a dozen slides with a word or a few words, and you will see that I'm very comfortable discussing what I think is my philosophy that builds trust within an organization. So the first thing I'll talk about is values. In the Army, we had this great set of values: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. Those are called organizational values. If you've been with a team, lots of teams have team values. What I'm referring to are your personal values, those that belong to you. And the way you know they're personal is because when somebody rubs against them, it's not in concert with the way you think. It creates a reaction in you, an emotional reaction, sometimes a physical reaction. Mine are responsibility, integrity, and some consider my third one a little odd, politeness. But I've figured out over time, when somebody doesn't seek and accept responsibility, it creates a reaction in me, both physically and mentally. When people choose to step off that line called integrity, It creates a reaction in me. When people are impolite, mean, hateful, ugly to people, it does the same thing. I have to put myself in check so that I don't say something that I'm going to regret later. But that's how you make a determination whether it's really a personal value or not. And in my experience, most people, you can hold on to about 3 or 4 of those. These other values are very important to the organization, but if I took that list, when somebody violates one of those or does something contrary, it doesn't necessarily create a reaction in me. Ethical decision-making model. A couple writers many years ago, Norman Vincent Peale and Ken Blanchard, teamed up to write what they call The Power of Ethical Management. They realized that, and you should realize as a leader, at some point in time, you have to make a decision if you're going to turn left or right. And sometimes people struggle with that. And in my mind, the way you help better manage that is by having an ethical decision-making model. Now, the Peale book is wonderful, but if you haven't figured out, I've been raised on an Alabama public education, and I struggle with these hard books. And so I have a very simple model called the bell, the book, and the candle. Pretty straightforward. The bell's when that little voice is going off in your head and says, you probably shouldn't do that. In my experience, then you probably shouldn't do it. And I'm sure nobody's ever had that little voice that said, don't jump. And you jumped and you went, I probably shouldn't have done that. And so that voice is in your head, tells you it's not a good idea, you probably shouldn't do it. The book, in the military, we make it easy because we tell you how to do everything. It's all black and white, it's all printed. Not so much in the private sector, but principally what that means, if it's written in law, rule, regulation, guidance, you probably shouldn't do it if it's not appropriate according to some published product. And the last one's the candle. And that is under the bright lights of day, with your parents standing behind you, your children at your feet, the camera is rolling. Can you explain your actions? And if you can't do that, then you probably shouldn't do it. And the last thing I'll share with you, if you have a battle buddy, a friend, somebody you're close with, in the military we call it a commander and a command sergeant major. If you're having to have a deep, long discussion about whether you should turn left or turn right, in my experience, you probably shouldn't do it. There's a term for it, it's called rationalization. You're trying to determine why it's okay to go ahead and go left, vice right. And one of you should look at the other one and say, look, we're spending way too much time talking about this. Maybe we shouldn't do it. Primary purpose of leaders. If I ask the audience, I'd get lots of great answers. And they would be great answers. I would share with you what World According to Kemp is. I think the primary purpose of the leader is simply to serve others. It's what we get paid to do. If you draw the triangle of an organization, you'll put the CEO, the senior vice presidents, etc., police department, chief of police down to patrolman, military commander down to private. I would submit to you, I think that pyramid is inverted. And I think the most senior people sit at the bottom of that point. Because our job is simply to serve those that are in the organization. We have a vested interest in it. Look, the concept is simple. If I take care of you and you're on my team, if you're successful, then I'm successful. It's not difficult. People tend to struggle with it, but it is really not that difficult. And here's what I found as a commander. You move to a new job for the first 30, 60, 90 days, particularly when you're deployed, people go, how you doing? How you holding up? Are you making it? And I think to myself, well, I had coffee this morning, and I read a little email, and I went to a briefing, and we ate lunch, and did a little PT, and man, a rough day. I barely made it. Now look, I don't mean to make light of what senior leaders do, particularly while forward deployed. It's a heavy responsibility. But in my experience, if you serve those that are on the team, they tend to take care of the hard work that needs to be done. So I'd encourage you to consider that. Deposits or withdrawals. I don't know if we have any Stephen Covey fans out there, but he wrote a great book many years ago called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And again, I mentioned Alabama Public Education. If you've read the book, God bless you, because I couldn't get through it. But the great thing at that point in time, we had a thing called a cassette tape. For you young people out there, it's a little plastic thing about this big. Got a little wheel, a little tape inside, and you shove it in a device, and it plays music or it speaks words. And this was words from Stephen Covey. And my spouse can attest to, I probably went through a half a dozen of those tapes. But the one tenet I took from him that helped support this concept of building trust in an organization was making deposits in people's emotional bank accounts. Now, that's a mouthful. So I'll kind of share with you the way I wrap my arms around it. In my early life, I spent a little time as a cop. Single, no kids. 2 a.m, you arrest Junior for drinking alcohol. You bring him to jail, you got to call Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad are not happy. They show up by 4, they're upset because by then Junior's passed out sleeping, he's cool. But I mean, parents are livid. But when they walk to the car, it's like this. And I'm like, how does that happen? Well, it's because Junior has spent the last 15 years making deposits in Mom and Dad's emotional bank account. If you have children, you know what I'm talking about. My youngest is sitting here in the crowd today. And now and then as a parent, you say or do something you probably shouldn't do. And you know as soon as it left your mouth, you can't take it back. And as a parent, so you fret about it till 4 a.m. How am I going to make it right? Well, the sun comes up. Well, as you know, they don't get up till 10 or 12. But when they wake up, they come strolling in, and it comes up. And if you met her, I'm kind of a little fella. She's a tall person. She puts her hands on my hip, and she kisses me on the top of the head. And we do a little hug, and it's like, it's all good, Dad. So if you think about that, that's because Dad and Mom have made deposits in their children's bank account for X number of years. Now, don't misunderstand me. And some people have been there. People that make too many withdrawals, they get overdrawn just like the bank. And when they do, getting back to zero is really hard to do. The other, what I'd call caveat to this concept is if you're doing it so you can make withdrawals or so you can get something, people see straight through that. If you're not making those deposits with absolute sincerity, they know it. But here's what I'd ask you to ask yourself. This morning when you got up, did you make deposits or withdrawals? When you left work on Friday, yesterday, if you look at your work day, did you make deposits or withdrawals? And it's not that hard. It's a simple, hey, good morning, how are you doing? How's your family? Or how about this? Watch this. Y'all haven't met Josh. He's in the back. Josh, you with us? Yeah, that's Josh. So watch this. Hey, Josh, have we told you how much we appreciate everything you've done to make this a success this weekend? What is that, 5 seconds out of my day? And you may not know it, but Josh was here when we got here yesterday and here when we left last night. And this morning, my guess is, was the first one here. If not, he's pretty close. And so we really appreciate that greatly. I don't know, that's like 3 more seconds out of my day. Whew, I mean, that was rough. And look, there's nothing Josh will ever do for me again. But that's a teeny tiny deposit that somebody's taken a moment to make in his emotional bank account. So I encourage you when you go to bed tonight, think, tomorrow am I going to make deposits or am I going to make withdrawals? And make a decision on what you want to do. Last thing I share with you is if you are put in a leadership position, it's a privilege. They could have picked anybody else to do it. Anybody else. Somebody made the decision that you could lead people in an organization. That's an absolute privilege. My challenge to you is build your leadership philosophy. Build it in such a way that your tenants do things to stimulate trust in your organization. And if not, then maybe it's not a tenet you want to hold on to. And build it in such a way that with a half a dozen slides, you can talk about it freely. Not a bunch of notes. You don't have to write a bunch of lines. You don't have to write 3 paragraphs. Just be able to have the conversation. My name is Kemp, and I'm privileged. I mean, truly privileged to serve. Thank you.